I don't know if you have any idea how hard it is sometimes, like if you're leading worship or you're speaking and then you find out that you have no visual, you have no words. And Phil handled that so well, and I'm handling it so well, but I'm laughing because I'm back there panicking because there's some verses and things I wanted to show you and some illustrations that would kind of add punch to what we're saying. And so I'm back there working my message and I'm praying, boy, God, if you don't speak, if you don't make this clear, it's going to be hard. And I look, and behind where I'm standing, there's a picture, and this picture kind of summarizes how I think we were feeling when we found this. I don't know if you can see this. This is what we thought when we realized we had no PowerPoint. It's like, ah! So if we're calm and we look like we got it all together, we're just good actors. So I'm a little nervous. I'm nervous because I have a lot to say today as we introduce an important element. We're in a series called Salt and Light, and it comes from Matthew 5, where it says, you are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And in that discourse, Jesus is saying, if your life intersects with mine and we come together, that intersection, that relationship, as you walk with me, should change how you live in such a way that the world takes notice. It should stop people in the tracks. It should turn heads. People should say, wow, that's different. Not, wow, that's odd. Not, wow, that's weird, but that's different. We don't see that every day. And we've been talking about what some of those characteristics might be like. And Jesus uses those two metaphors, kind of that salt of the earth that gives flavor, light, it's bright, it turns heads, it stops people. And they take notice and they're asking the question, man, why did they respond that way? Because that is not the way I would have responded. We're going to talk about today and this next week about one of those qualities that in this world is incredibly distinct. It's so rare. It is so not the norm that when people see it or they receive it from you, it catches them off guard. We're going to talk about the art of forgiveness. We're going to talk about forgiving, and I mean really forgiving those who hurt us. You don't have to live very long to have people hurt you. I'm amazed this week at how many people specifically, not knowing what we're preaching on, not even coming to Rivertree, who asked me, do I really need to forgive them? One of my good friends, I don't think he's here. If he is here, he won't mind me sharing this, but he told me about a situation, and then he said, I had to say to her, I can't forgive you. And we'll be talking about that a little bit. It's not really I can't forgive you. If we could be really honest, it's not I can't forgive you. It's I won't forgive you. And we're going to talk about what that means a little bit more next week. Now, I want to say right up front that if you hear some of the stuff I'm saying, and it's good stuff, but it's not mine. So you're not going to be able to say, oh, Greg is so sharp. Let's not make that mistake. I am taking a lot of stuff from primarily one source and several sources, but primarily one source who, when I was looking up this topic and studying it this week, it turned my head, and I thought it was fairly profound. So I want to share some of that with you this morning. I want to start off talking about forgiveness, but I want to do what we do sometimes, and that is before we talk about forgiveness, I want to talk about what forgiveness is not. I want to make it really clear what it is not. Because when I talk about forgiveness, some of you are already thinking of people who hurt you or thinking about situations of which you cannot forgive. And it's because you don't understand what forgiveness is not. I want to say 4 quick statements. Number 1, forgiveness is not condoning. There's a time where I asked somebody about that we were talking about forgiving, and they said, yeah, I know I should forgive them, but I'm afraid if I forgive them, it'll send the wrong message. I'm afraid that they might think what they did wasn't a big deal. I'm afraid that they might think it was okay. I'm afraid that if I forgive them, that I'll be condoning that behavior. To forgive is a separate issue from condoning. I want you to understand that when you forgive, it doesn't mean what they did wasn't wrong. In fact, there's probably a really good possibility that what they did was indeed very wrong. But forgiving them is not condoning behavior. We sometimes confuse those and we put them together. It's not saying that what they did was not hurtful, it wasn't wrong, or it wasn't unjust, or whatever it was. These are separate issues, forgiving and condoning. The second statement I want to make, and it would be on PowerPoint, boom, maybe. So what you just saw was not condoning. Okay, the second thing you'd be seeing on the screen is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not necessarily forgetting. Some people say, hey, when you forgive, you're supposed to forgive and forget. That is not true. There are some people out there that you will forgive, and I want you to know that those people you forgive probably, and some of them will be, abusive, dangerous, divisive, and toxic. Forgiving them doesn't fix them. I wish it was that easy. You releasing them by forgiving them doesn't make them better. There's a proverb, this great proverb that says, as a dog returns to vomit, so a fool to his folly, which is a really great verse if you don't like what's being served at lunch. And what that says simply is this: there are some people, it doesn't matter, they keep going back to that bad behavior. It is not like an anomaly out of their character, it is their character. The scripture speaks of those who are not safe. And sometimes to choose to forgive means not to forget. Why? Because if you forget, you will put yourself again in harm's way. Sometimes to forgive means not to forget. It means instead to set up safe boundaries, appropriate boundaries, so that that person or those people are not allowed to hurt you or others again that way. Now I want you to hear what that means. That means sometimes you can forgive a person and still get a restraining order. It means sometimes you can forgive a person but still end up in court pressing charges. Are you tracking with me here? These are totally different issues between forgiving and forgetting. If he's hitting you, if he's abusing your children, you don't forget. You might forgive, but get out. Get your children out. Forgive, but don't forget. Now, I want you to know, in a healthy relationship, sometimes you can forgive and forget. Sometimes somebody says something, they hurt you, you approach them and you say, you know what, I don't know if you meant this. A few days ago you said this, it hurt me, this is what I heard you say, and I'm really struggling with it. And they might look at you and say, oh my goodness, that doesn't represent how I feel. I was angry, that was inappropriate, I shouldn't have said that at all, I spoke out of line, I'm sorry. And in those cases, you can forgive and forget and move on. In healthy relationships, you have the opportunity to dialogue and respond and resolve. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes to forgive means not to forget, to ensure safety and well-being. Forgiving and forgetting are separate issues. Third, 2 words now up here, not reconciling. Sometimes to forgive does not mean to reconcile. To reconcile means both parties come together and they sort out all kinds of issues, and then they agree upon conditions. The expectations are defined and clarified and worked out. Sometimes to forgive a person is one thing, but for the relationship to return how it was is different. Sometimes because of what has happened, it might be impossible for the relationship to be restored to its original state. Some people would say, no, you're to forgive and support them and then act like it never happened. And then come back together like you were before, and that's just not true. Forgiveness and reconciliation, again, are different matters, different issues. And then finally, number 4. Forgiveness is not the same as justice and consequence. Sometimes people will say, well, I've forgiven them and now I'm going to protect them from reaping the consequences of what they did. They asked for forgiveness, so I'm just going to try to protect them. And that's a wrong choice almost all the time, but a lot of the time. Because sometimes what it's going to take for that person to change that behavior is consequences. Sometimes to forgive is different than justice. Sometimes what's going to have to be involved is institutional consequences. Sometimes there's going to be legal ramifications. Sometimes there's going to be fines that have to be paid and restitution that has to be made. Forgiveness is different from consequences and justice. Now, there's a couple more foundational things I want to say about forgiveness, and this is true of forgiveness. 2 things I want to say that is true about forgiveness. Number 1, forgiveness, and if we had the words up there, it would say, is always personal. Forgiveness is always personal. Somebody has hurt, slighted, wounded, or wronged you. It's personal. They hurt you. And it's important for us to understand that it's personal. It's key. Why? Some of you, if you've grown up in the church, have you ever heard anybody say, I am just angry at the church? Okay, so if somebody's angry at Rivertree and this is your home, they're angry at everybody. They're angry at the church. And what that is it's kind of a big, vague, giant monster in the closet. It's really undefined. And then church becomes not just Rivertree, but that church, this church, and any church. You've seen that, right? And I'm not dismissing that feeling. I've shared that I've had that feeling many times myself. But what happens when a person says they're mad at the church, it becomes kind of a faceless beast. They have issues with the church, or at that church, or with people in the church, but not necessarily the church. Here's why. Because you can't forgive a big, faceless, unnamed monster. That's exactly right. Have you ever known somebody who got fired, maybe wrongly, dismissed from their position, and now they're absolutely mad? They have a profound resentment towards that company, that organization, that institution. And it might have 2,000 employees, but the person who really nicked them was their overseer who wrongly accused them, but now they're mad at the whole company. That's paralyzing. Maybe that happened to you or a friend, and they have such a profound sense of being wronged, and rightfully so. And we're not dismissing, by the way, a real sense of consequence or loss or hurt, or maybe the significance of what has occurred. We're not dismissing that, but what we are saying that to hold on to that in that kind of a big thing is paralyzing. Because forgiveness is not like that. Forgiveness is deeply personal. It's impossible to be angry at a church or an institution or a building. It's really a non-entity. It's most likely somebody there has done something to wrong you, but you can only be set free when you forgive and you're able to name the pain. When you can specify either the person or the action. Only then can you focus in, forgive, and then move on. When we don't do that, and when it becomes big like that, it becomes really like a heavy, heavy weight upon the shoulders. Because you can never fully release it. So forgiveness is personal. And then the second thing I want you to know, it's not only personal, it's a process. It's a process. Some of us, again, have been in those situations where we have been wronged. And then there comes this either confrontation, or that person takes the initiative and they come and apologize, and you forgive, and there's an immediate sense of freedom and a closure. And it's clean, simple, and done, and you move on. But a lot of times it's not like that. It's not that simple. It's not that clean. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who was abused years ago as a child. We have a friend, and actually it's a friend of mine. My wife has not met them, but he was telling me the story of his wife, who was terribly abused as a child. And for 40 years, folks, 4 decades, she suppressed that in her subconscious. It was like it did not happen. For 40 years, no recollection. And one day he comes home, and his wife is curled up in a fetal position with her thumb in the mouth, weeping like a child, unable to cope and unable to move. She was absolutely paralyzed. It all came back. 40 years, nothing, and it came back. If you would have went to her and said, you just need to forgive and move on, you would have done more damage than probably the original violation of her innocence. There are so many incredible layers to what occurred and how she covered it up. Over the next weeks and months, indeed, it's been almost a 2 or 3 year process of her unpacking this thing. She didn't realize, for example, all the consequences, habits, and patterns that she had developed in order to protect herself from that terrible pain. And indeed, she still is working through it. For her, forgiveness is a process. I heard a guy talking about a woman who had been raped. And she was talking to her pastor about what had occurred. And she made this statement, something like this. She said, you know what? I can't forgive you. I am in no position to forgive him. I have to forgive myself. And he thought that was interesting. And she goes, because for years I thought it was something that I deserved because I thought so little of myself. And I allowed myself to be the victim twice. And it's a very, very, very perceptive. There's so many layers sometimes to forgiveness. And so much involved. It's a process. That might mean that tomorrow morning when you wake up, for the first time, you don't find yourself absolutely inundated with all kinds of thoughts of mutilating and torturing that person who's hurt you, and you're having less of them. And that might be for you the first step of the process. Okay? But maybe like that great Christian movie, one of the greatest of all time, sometimes it takes baby steps. Baby steps in this process. Forgiveness is definitely hard work. And that means it's more than just mere intellectual assent, saying, okay, I choose to forgive them. We'll talk about what that means in different light next week. But there's, again, all these emotional layers that have to be worked through. Now, what I want to do for the next few minutes is this. I want to give you an example out of Scripture of what we would call relational conflict. And we all have it. We have it at home. Some of you might have had it on the way to church. We have it at work. We have it in the neighborhood. We have it with our children and or our parents. And so there's this Old Testament story that I really like. It's a unique story. And it comes out of the life of a unique biblical character. And we know him as Samson. And if you want to read a guy, I love this guy. Talk about, this is the Old Testament guy who definitely was on roids. And he has some serious anger management issues. But I want to read you a story that takes place here. I want you to understand, even before we read this text, already in the background, there's already been some conflict that has occurred, okay? And it tends to be ongoing in this guy's life. So I want to read you, and I wish we could read it off the screen so you would know I'm not making it up. But it's from Judges 15. I'll start with the first verse. This is what it says. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. Guys, take notice. He knocks on the door. It's not a bouquet of flowers. It's not chocolate. It's not red wine. It's a goat. Hey, honey, I'm home. I got the goat. You know what that means. Yeah, that works. Okay, and so shows up at the house, and it says this. He said, I'm going to my wife's room, but her father would not let Samson go in. Why not? And this is what the father-in-law says. I was so sure you hated her that I gave her to your companion. Now, in the previous chapter, he told a riddle, and he told the secret of the riddle to his wife. His wife gave it to the Philistines, who she was a Philistine, gave it to his enemies, and there's this consequence, and he's ticked at her, and that's why she's at home with Dad. And so he says, I figured you were ticked at her, so I gave her away. Okay, I love that. Another translation says, I gave her in marriage to your best man. Okay, so you're 2 verses into this chapter, and already you find yourselves in kind of a Canaanite Jerry Springer territory show or something. It's like you got to be, it's just bizarre. You're expecting chairs to fly, the security guys to come in, separate them. But it moves from there to the Twilight Zone. Okay? Because then the father-in-law says, I gave her away. Hey, but get this. This is what he says in that verse. Look, her younger sister is more beautiful than she is. Marry her instead. This guy's giving away kids like they're candy. I love that. Oh, you know, Samson, sorry, first time around, you got the ugly duckling. But this girl, she's a looker. I'll make it right with you. How would you like to have that as a dad? I mean, it's like somebody knocked on the door, I'd be afraid. I'm out doing chores or something. And you thought your in-laws were messed up. Now, this is a family reunion you skip. Okay? If you've got your Bible and you're looking at the heading of this chapter in Judges 15, this is what it says. This says, Samson's vengeance on the Philistines. I want you to know that anytime you read anything about Samson in the Bible, you could probably put it all of it under one heading, adventures and testosterone. Much of his life falls in one of 2 categories, hormones or adrenaline. I'm serious. Okay? This guy's the epitome of, you've heard man jokes that women talk about? This is the guy who's the poster child. No brain, lots of muscle, okay? No tact. And mad all the time, all right? In a contemporary situation, he drives a pickup, got a gun rack in the back, empty beer cans fill the bed of the truck, half of them have been smashed against his forehead. And if he's in Minnesota, he's pulling a trailer that has long seen its best days. Mullet, six-pack, missing 1.5 beers on the front seat, and a pinch between the cheek and gum. All right, I want you to catch that, all right? And just as a warning, don't turn to your wife and say, hey, he's talking about your family. That's not a good idea. Okay, so you got an idea of Samson right here. Verse 3. Samson said to them, now he's already had a fight. Samson says to them, father-in-law's there must be other family members. He says, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. This time I will really harm them. There's some really key phrases. This time I have a right. I will get even. I will really harm them. You did that to me? All right, bud. You messed with the wrong guy. You crossed a line, all right? You're gonna be really sorry. You ever had any feelings like that at all? Verse 4, so Samson went out. I love this. Samson went out, caught 300 foxes, and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails. Oh, would Peter be ticked. He'd be in trouble. He lit the torches and he let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines like you do, okay? So we're going to set it very creative. I'm going to burn up the crops. Here's how I'm going to do it. 300 foxes. And true of any one of us. You cross me? You're going to throw down the foxes, okay? Yeah. Don't knock that off. No. I got 300 in the back of the truck, right under the tarp next to the grill. All right, verse 5. He lit the torches, he let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines, and he burned up the shocks and the standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. Okay, here's the deal. And this is not just a plot by the garage, of somebody's little family garden. These are the crops that the Philistines, their nation, their country, their people depend upon. They worship several gods. They worship the god of the sun, of the rain, of the ground, of the seed, and they worship that god. And when they have a bumper crop and the crop comes up, it's because God was good to them. So when Samson does this to the Philistines, it's a slap in the chops. It's a slam not only to them as a people, not only is there economic ramifications of what he's done, but he's basically saying your gods are weak. Okay, Israel serves the God, and you serve the false gods. So that it's really a chop, a slap. It's not just something little that happens here. Their national security is now threatened. Their economy is now unstable. If anything goes wrong and they didn't have enough stored up, there's going to be famine. This is a call to war. All right, we would say it this way. They threatened our national security, and they've drawn a line in the sand. So verse 6, when the Philistines asked who did this, they were told Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion. Yeah, his father-in-law gave his wife away. So listen what the Philistines did, and this is their own people. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. All right? Do you see what happened? There's just this little squabble, and now it's festering, and it's growing, and now it's moved up to a whole new level. It's escalating. A side note, by the way, because Samson says to them in verse 7, oh, since you did this, okay, he's already said that a couple of times, since you did this, well. And again, Samson's the one who kind of ignited this whole thing and took it to another level. This guy's in no position to say, well, hey, this is not my fault. You started it. He has no ground to stand on. Samson says, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. Let me ask you a question, and I want you to just ask yourself, because all of us have had different feelings of revenge in our lives, and some of you might be there now. When do you know you have your revenge? When do you know that, okay, we're even, it's cool now? Is it one of those deals where you go, no, I got peace with God? That's how it works. Is it one of those times where you feel, man, I was a cauldron of emotions. I was angry, envious, revengeful, and I had a hallmark moment. And all of a sudden I had this very airy, light feeling, sense of well-being deep in my soul. When do you know you have revenge? Revenge is never sweet when you're even. It doesn't work that way. Revenge is only sweet when you think you're ahead. That's why it just seems to never end. Samson says, I swear I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. That doesn't mean he just gave them a whooping. That means he killed them. All right? Then he went down and he stayed in a cave in the rock, went camping. The Philistines went up, because there was many of them, and they must have fled. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, and they were spreading out near Lehi. And the people now, so you got the Philistines, they're in a foreign country now. Okay, this has escalated. We've crossed some lines here, some national, from one country into another. And the people of Judah said, why are you here? You want to fight? You here for war? And they said, no, we've come to take Samson prisoner to do to him as he did to us. Do you see this continually chip on the shoulder thing? And then it says, verse 11, 3,000 men. 3,000 men. Folks, this started with a dude, a goat, and a father-in-law. And now we've moved into 3,000 men. We went from a family squabble to nations at war. 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave and said to Samson, don't you realize the Philistines are rulers over us? Now they're rulers over us. We don't want to go to war, but now you're inciting war and they're ticked. We don't want to become a casualty of war of which we're not involved in. And they said, what are you doing? We're your own people. What are you doing to us? And then his answer is, I merely did to them what they did to me. And is this junior hires? Okay? I mean, it's like Samson said, my hands are clean in this. Well, it's not my fault. They started it. I'm just responding in kind. I'm pushing back. So they said to Samson, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. Samson said, okay. No, these are his own people, but they don't want to mess with this guy. If you know any of the stories of Samson, you'll see one coming up. You don't want to mess with it. They took 3,000. Okay, not just two guys at the bar, let's go get them. No, this 3,000. Samson said, okay, swear to me that you won't kill me. Tie me up, I can handle that. And so verse 13, agreed. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. Not so bad. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and they led him up from the rock. Verse 14, as he approached, the Philistines came toward him shouting. And the Spirit of the Lord, because he had this gift of strength from God, not that he used it rightly, but it came from God, came powerfully upon Samson. The ropes of his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. The Hulk is loose, okay? The Hulk is in the house. Let's look at that. Verse 15, finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey. They're just laying around. I love that. Like he's looking around for something to hit him with. Oh, there's a jawbone of a donkey. A new toy. He's got ADD. I can relate to that. It says he grabs this thing and he struck down 1,000 men. Okay, that's what the text says. He grabs this jawbone and he just goes at these guys. He kills 1,000. All right? And it says this, verse 16, then Samson said, with the donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. If you read that in the Young Literal Translation, it's a little bit more bold. Or the King James. With the donkey's jawbone, I've killed 1,000 men. Now here's done. We're done with the story. The story starts out with a dude, a goat, some feelings of romance, and a father-in-law who didn't play team. Okay? That's where this started. And it ends up with the dude killing 1,000 men. And here's what I want to say about unforgiveness, about bitterness, about relational conflict when it goes unresolved. And it's this. Revenge always escalates. Revenge always escalates. It does not function on a plateau or a plane. It does not flatline. It starts out with a rolling of the eyes at a meeting that was not run real well. You ever been there? But it does not end with the rolling of the eyes. I had a friend and I'd looked for it this morning because I remembered it, but they had stuck in their Facebook, "Did you just roll your eyes at me?" And in the context of a couple that are married. It might start with the rolling of the eyes. It does not end with the rolling of the eyes back. Revenge always escalates. We see this in literature. And one of the places that you see is in the story of Romeo and Juliet. And you know that the story there, and there's these two families that are warring families, factions. And the conflict between them has resulted in decades of civil war and strife. There's a bitter rivalry there. And the casualties continue even down to the two children of the families who have fallen in love. But the question is, how did it start? And tucked into Shakespeare's prose is this line: "An exchange and an airy word was spoken." We would say it this way: someone gave an offhanded comment, and the person who heard it could not let it go. We would say there was an inappropriate statement, a disrespectful line, somebody got dissed, and someone trash talked. We put it that way in our vernacular today. Revenge always escalates. And the second thing I want you to know about revenge and conflict is simply this: it always inflames. It always creates, if I can say it this way, within a person an inflated ego. It makes them feel like that person has somehow either put them down or didn't realize that that person that put them down didn't realize that they were indeed below them. Does that make sense? And they feel like, who are you? Who are you to diss on me? How dare you? This time I have a right. This time I have a right to get even. I'm just going to do to them what they did to me. And so you have this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth kind of volley of anger, hatred, sinful actions, disrespect. It just increases intensity. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as, number one, there's no such thing as cable. That beautiful thing called flat screens had not yet been evolved. And a video game came out when I was in, I think, junior high, early high school, and we called it Pong. Anybody seen Pong? And we, actually, while I was going to be talking now for this last couple minutes, I was going to just have it play on the screen. But if you've ever seen it, those of you who are young, you'd go, "Oh, that's what cavemen played with," and that would be wrong. Some of you would think, well, they must have came out with that just after electricity. Pretty close. And I saw Shannon, he played it a lot when he was a kid. Still has it, it's his favorite game. If you've ever played that game, in fact, go to YouTube if you're young and you don't know what it is and watch it, and you're going to go, "You got to be kidding me." It's just so boring and so one-dimensional. But Pong is this ball that goes back. It's like a tennis game in slow-mo and black and white. It's just very blocky. And it just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's what happens in relational conflict. That's what happens when we don't forgive. That's what happens when we hold on to bitterness. That's what happens when we seek revenge. It's just relational Pong that has gone all wrong, and there's going to be other people who get hurt. I read somewhere, when the elephants fight, it's the pygmies who suffer. When people have conflict, there are usually other casualties. So here's all I have for you this morning. Here's all I have for you this morning. Because we're going to talk a little bit more specifically how Jesus sets this incredible pattern that we are supposed to emulate and to imitate. But here is the point this morning. Forgiveness is simply putting down the jawbone of the donkey. Forgiveness is simply letting go of the control and letting the Pong pass. Forgiveness is simply saying, I'm not going to strike back. Forgiveness is simply saying, I'm not going to play this anymore. Forgiveness is simply saying, I will let go. And I want you to know, forgiveness is not that simple. Because forgiveness means, and here's where the pain is. Forgiveness means I'm going to yield. I'm going to give. I might indeed suffer. I might indeed take a stride. I might indeed lose something here. There might be consequences that I take. I might hurt in this, but I refuse to allow it to continue to go on. I will let go. And you know what makes that really hard? There's a lot of people out there who won't give a flying rip that you did that. Indeed, there are people, if you're not careful, that will try it again. And that's why you have to set up those boundaries. Forgiveness is hard work. And that's why it's so rare. Every person here has got at least one or two people they can think of with very little thought of somebody who's deeply hurt them, of which the pain still is there. And I want you to know, forgiveness doesn't mean the absence of pain. We're going to talk a little bit, I think, next week about this piece. Somebody said, well, I can't forgive them because if I don't feel like it and I forgive them, then I'm being a hypocrite. You ever heard that before? But sometimes doing the right thing when you don't feel like it is not hypocrisy, it's character. So what do you do with that this morning? Some of you need just to take a first step and say, okay, God, I'm just going to acknowledge that there is this issue, and I have been refusing to forgive. This person, that situation. When you do that, I just saw a thing on the internet today that said when you hold a grudge against somebody, you are giving them free rent in the room of your brain. Because, to be honest, we do that. We think, I'll be mad at them and they will, oh yeah, I'll be mad at them. And it didn't hurt them. It hurts the one that holds on to it. And indeed, some people could give a flying rip whether or not they hurt you or not. They don't care. Because they're not safe. And they're dangerous, and they're toxic, and they're divisive. So forgiveness is not really so much about them, is it? It's about you not letting the poison of a bitter spirit affect who you are. So as the worship team comes up, I want to just ask this question. Who do you need? What step do you need to take? And maybe today it's just acknowledging, God, I have not forgiven this person, I have not released this person. For some of you, it might be saying, today, God, I'm going to release and let them go. Some of you, it might mean, I need to go with this person and just tell them I'm sorry because I was wrong. I don't know. But I will tell you this. We're going to sing a song or two, and over here there's a thing called the Lord's Supper, communion. Lord's Supper is based on an interesting thing, and a lot of times it's tied directly into what we call the Lord's Prayer. And in the Lord's Prayer, there's this little doggone phrase that most of us just, and it's one of those things like if you're praying that prayer out loud, you just, you cough, so you don't have to say, you pretend like you just, swallowed something, I'm going to have to take a break in this part of the prayer. I got to pick up milk at the store. And that's that phrase that says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Those are hard words to choke back, aren't they? So what do you need to do?